everyone. This is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel, our Facebook group, and our newsletter. And our great sponsors, Abitiva Casa, Phil Italy, and Italy Rooting. And my guest today is Tess Martin. And Tess, you're in Amsterdam?
I'm in Rotterdam in the Netherlands.
Rotterdam. I knew there was a dam in there someplace.
Yes, there's a lot of dams in the Netherlands, generally speaking.
Yeah, and we did several cruises with Holland America. So, all their ships are named after the cities, as you probably know better than me.
Yeah, and they traditionally left from here, from Rotterdam. And there's even an old hotel here called Hotel New York, which is on the river, and it's traditionally, the hotel where people would stay before getting on the ship. That's why it's called Hotel New York.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that. That's pretty neat. That's really neat. So we certainly want to talk about your Italian background, but, how'd you wind up there?
My parents lived in Europe for 20, 25 years that happened to coincide with most of my childhood, or all of my childhood. And so one of the places we lived in the early 2000s when I was a teenager was the Netherlands. And then I came back here to study a master's course about 12 years ago. And then I managed to stay in the Netherlands because of a special visa that exists for American freelancers, which is totally random and strange. But it just so happens that if you're a freelancer, so an artist in my case, this is one of the, and if you have a US American passport, this is one of the easier places to emigrate to because of this random visa that exists. So,
oh, that's neat. Well, maybe
if anyone is interested, you can Google the DAFT visa, the Dutch American Friendship Treaty visa. That's what it's called.
Oh, wow. That's cool information for people, certainly freelancers. I have one of the people I interviewed who became a friend, Michael Fattarossi. I guess his home is in Amsterdam now, but he's splits his time between Lettere and Amsterdam. And he's building some kind of palazzo now, and I think in Lettere. So
I would imagine he's building it in Italy and not in Amsterdam.
Yes. He's building it.
Though you never know, Amsterdam is also expanding.
Yeah. No, I've never been there. Been in a lot of places. I never made it there. So we keep saying we want to do one of those river cruises. So maybe we'll get there eventually, because I know a lot of them start there, right?
Yeah, and they go down to Belgium also. I think that's quite a popular thing. Yeah, the canal system.
Yeah. So what are your Italian roots?
Yeah, so it's all thanks to my mother's father. Both my parents are from New Jersey, and my mother's father, Joe Medica, was from Philadelphia. And he was born to his father, who was from the north of Italy, from the Genoa region, though I should say his grandparents, because his father was born in Philadelphia also. His father's parents were from near Genoa, and his mother's parents were from the south near Salerno. And the two families, the Medicas and the Guglielmottis, they lived very near each other in South Philadelphia. They lived like a block away from each other. So presumably that's where his parents met, because they lived so close. And from this union, my grandfather was born. And then, unfortunately, his mother, Rosa Guglielmotti, died when he was 1 year old in the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic in Philadelphia. So he didn't know her, and he knew of her family. I mean, he knew her family. They were around. But really, he grew up with the Medicas in his father's house with all his aunts. So Philadelphia, and then he kind of got out of Philadelphia as a teenager and joined the Navy, which was probably for the best, I think is the story. That he was going through some stuff and had kind of a rough friendship crowd. So for better or worse, he ended up joining the Navy, and then eventually they ended up in New Jersey. But yeah, I've been researching the family history for quite a few years, but it all kind of started because one of the places we lived in, like I just described growing up, happened to be Florence in Italy. This has nothing to do with our Italian heritage, even though we were all very happy to be there. And my mother especially was happy to be in Italy. My mother also looks very much, I think, like her grandmother, the one who passed away young. I think she really looks like her. She doesn't look almost at all like the Genovese side of the family, which is ironic because they are the ones that we are more familiar with. Anyway, we just so happened to live in Florence in the 80s and 90s. And then I was in Italy for an artist residency, like as an adult. So of course I was very happy to be back in Italy on this artist residency. This artist residency was in a town called Bogliasco, which is south of Genoa on the coast. And my mom, I was there for a month, and my mom like called me up or sent me an email, and she said, you know that you're near the place where dad's grandparents came from, the Genovese side of the family. And I was like, huh? Because actually they weren't from Genoa. We thought they were from a town up in the mountains from Genoa called Chicagna, which is just a really humble mountain town. But this artist residency happened to be near Chicagna. So I was like, okay, contacted the priest at the local church and took a bus that kind of wound its way around the mountains and ended up in this church basement in Chicagna. The priest was very nice, and he was just like, yeah, come in, here's the office. And he just opened a cupboard, and there was all the books, all the baptisms and the marriages from all the way back to like the 17. The church itself is not original. The church had been rebuilt in the 40s, but the records, they still had all the old books. So at the time, I didn't really know exactly what I was looking for because I just kind of started this family history research journey, but I couldn't let the opportunity go by of visiting in person. So I basically just took pictures of everything with the name in it, which in this case is Bacigalupo, which is my grandfather was Joe Medica, and his father was Giuseppe Medica. His parents are the ones that emigrated. So his dad was Giovanni Battista Medica, even though he went by Charles in the US. And his mother was Assunta Bacigalupo. And all the names in these books in Chicagna were Bacigalupo. They weren't Medica. They were all Bacigalupo. So it was all Assunta's family. Later, we learned why this was. But I just took a bunch of pictures of everything with that name. And of course, there's a lot of people with that name in this town. In fact, when we had been there once before in the 80s when we lived there, me and my parents went up there and I mean, I don't really remember this because I was a kid, but they have this funny story where they were, and this is like 1989. So they had taken the bus up to Chicagna, this humble mountain village, and they went to a little cafe and they were like looking for the cemetery or something. So they needed to ask directions. And my mom said she walked in and there was someone sitting at the bar who was the spitting image of one of her brothers. And she was like, okay, I guess I'm in the right place. She inquired as to, where the cemetery was. And they asked, where are you from? And she said, America. And the person said, which one? North or south? Mm. So that was the first kind of learning moment for my mother. Like, oh, right. Yes. Half these people didn't go to North America. They went to South America. And then she said, yeah, the name that is from here in my family is Bacigalupo. And they laughed and they said, I'm Bacigalupo. He's Bacigalupo. Everyone here is Bacigalupo. So they that's where their research kind of stopped at that time because they didn't really have the tools to dig further. So that's where I picked it up from them. I picked up all this research that they had done in the 70s and 80s and started digging through it.
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with philitaly.co. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co. You were so lucky that the priests did that, because a lot of them won't.
Yeah, I had to, practice my Italian on the phone, which was, challenging, because on the phone and it's like an old guy, like he's not making it easy on me. But we managed, and I brought him some olives, like I brought him a gift. So I agree. It's hit and miss. It depends on the priest who is up for it. But we've had quite good luck, I think, so far. Yeah. So anyway, I started researching. I kind of started from the beginning, or from today. So I researched a lot in Philadelphia as well, and kind of working our way back, because we didn't know how these two people had met. Giovanni Battista Medica and his wife Assunta Bacigalupo. We thought that he was from Genoa, the big city, and she was from this mountain village. So we were mystified, and there was some family stories that had been passed down about how Giovanni Battista's whole family had died in some epidemic or something, and he was the only one left, and that's why he emigrated. And we were kind of at a standstill, and then I found a document that changed our search and provided the next step. And that was we already had the marriage license from 1887, I believe. In Philadelphia, we had the marriage license. But what it was that I found was the parish marriage record from the Roman Catholic Church of St. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi in Philadelphia, which I hadn't realized even existed, the parish records. But for those listening who have marriages in Philadelphia, these records are not on ancestry.com, at least as of now. You never know, things change. But they can be found on Find My Past, which is like the British version of Ancestry. So just so you know, it's worth it, I guess, to get a membership for a short time at Find My Past, just for this record set, because you can't find it anywhere else. And the reason this was important is because the record had something scribbled on the side, and it was very hard to read. And so I hired somebody to analyze it and like translate it. And it was a note from the priest, and it was in Latin. And the note said that there was a dispensation given for the now resolved impediment of consanguinity in the collateral life in the second grade, which means that they were first cousins.
Okay.
Yeah. And so this was not one of the family stories that had been passed down. But then with this, I was able to go back and research and realize that Giovanni Battista's mother was Rosa Bacigalupo. And she was the sister of Assunta's father. The mystery partially solved, right? Like, okay, so the connection was actually a generation earlier between the Medicas and the Bacigalupos. So that was quite exciting. And there had been one record that I had photographed on my trip to the parish that I hadn't quite understood its importance. And it was a record that stated Giovanni Battista's. Oh no, I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry. There's a lot to get through, and like feel free to stop me, because I'm just gonna like keep talking if you don't. So backtracking a little bit, we knew that Giovanni Battista, if not his parents, was from Genoa. So because also in the parish marriage record it said that he was from Genoa and she was from Chicagna specifically. So we were like, okay, he's actually from Genoa. But then how and when did his parents move to Genoa from the mountain village, right? This information we would find out later after I hired a researcher. But what we discovered was that his father, who is called Giuseppe Medica, very, imaginative first names. Everyone has the same name. Giuseppe and his wife, Rosa Bacigalupo, moved to the big city because Giuseppe was a budding mason of sorts. He became specialized in a type of terrazzo flooring that is very common in Genoa, which is this kind of floor with lots of little chips of stone that has been polished flat. And at the time, this is like the 18s, this flooring was known as pavimenti alla veneziana because they were from Venice. This style of floor was actually being imported from Venice. And it was only later, like 40 or 50 years later, that the Genovese kind of developed this style of flooring, and they started making more complicated kind of flowery designs in the chips with different colors of stone. And that became known as pavimenti alla genovese. So they kind of made it their own style of flooring. So anyway, that's why this guy moved his family to Genoa, was because he had apparently some ambitions outside of the mountain villages, and he became an apprentice, and then he kind of moved up the ladder a little bit. And we learned a bit about him, and unfortunately, the deaths in their little family. They had a couple kids that died really young, and we even found the addresses that they lived at, and we managed to visit these places in Genoa 2 years ago when we were there. And all of these really nitty-gritty things, I give credit to the researcher that we hired. Like, eventually we hired a local researcher. So if anyone is interested, Elena Gissi, she specializes in Northern Italian records. I think she lives in Torino, but she can do stuff all around.
I interviewed her.
Oh, you
I
did?
interviewed her, yes.
That's amazing.
A couple of years ago, probably more than a couple now.
Oh, what did you talk about?
About her business. Actually, no, what happened was, so the interview is called The Woman in Black because she had a client, and her client's story was amazing because she was looking for a place to stay and wasn't sure, and she kind of was down to two places, and she did like eeny, meeny, miny, mo. She picked the place and found out the place that she picked was in her family. Was willed to the people who owned it now.
Okay.
And
cool.
She just picked this place. So we talked about that. We talked about her with her client. I did it. It was like the two of them. And then I, through Family Search, I did the consultation with them because they do free consultations.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, they're really neat. Yeah,
like
they'll
for
do
brick
a half-hour
walls.
consultation if you're stuck with, if you have a roadblock or something. So I had a roadblock on my fourth great-grandmother, who was the Duchess of Capricotta, and they found a 40-page document that was her nephew was disputing the will because her uncle said that he wouldn't leave anything to anybody unless their last name was DeRiso. And she was the only DeRiso. And even though she was a woman, he willed everything to her, which was unheard of back then. And she translated this document for me.
Oh, great.
It was pretty
cool.
So,
Elena's great. I mean, she's so tenacious. Like she really went above and beyond, like hunting down these various.
She did a research for one of the shows. I forget which one. One of those.
Like Finding Your Roots.
You find it? Yes.
Yeah. She's great. I mean, I'm almost sad that we kind of ran out of things too. We kind of investigated everything that we could, or that felt like worthwhile. But yeah, she found out some amazing things that we would not have been able to do just on the internet, because that you really needed to go in person to the archive. And one of these things was we had the family story that Giovanni Battista's whole family had died in some epidemic, and he was the only one left, and that's why he emigrated to Philadelphia. But that wasn't actually completely true. What we found in the records is that his siblings had died at a young age, like in 1860, 1861, and that might have been one of the epidemics, who knows. And then actually him and his parents moved back to Chicagna, the village. And that was interesting. We didn't realize that they had moved back there. You know, he was born in Genoa, and then he emigrated from Genoa. So we just assumed he had always lived in Genoa and had never actually lived in the village. And then we found the death record for his mother. And it turns out that just a small amount of time after they had moved back to Chicagna, she was institutionalized in a hospital in Genoa. So she was sent back to the big city, and she was put in the Ospedale dei Cronici, which is the hospital for chronic illnesses in Genoa, which doesn't exist anymore. The building was destroyed in World War II, but somehow the books survived and are now in a different archive in a different hospital, ironically. And she was put in the department for epileptics demented, whatever that means. This is in 1872, when she was 46 years old. She entered this hospital. And there's some indications that she might have been transferred from a psychiatric hospital, but it wasn't clear. And her diagnosis was chronic dementia. Again, whatever that means at this time, right? So we actually visited this archive, and we found her record. Like, we knew that her record was there somewhere, but they're not digitized and we needed to look for it. So this was quite a surprise in the archive. And she was only there for 5 years, and she died in 1877 at the age of 51 of decline and weakening. So what's interesting about the timing of this is that when his mother went into the hospital, Giovanni Battista was 10 years old. And when she died, he was about 14 or 15. But actually, he got on a boat to Philadelphia in June 1877. And 2 months later, his mother died in the hospital. So he was without his mother for the previous 5 years as a young teenager. And then he made the decision to emigrate as a very young man. And right after he left, his mother died. And I've always wondered if he went to the hospital on his way to the boat, to say goodbye, because she was also in Genoa and he left from Genoa. So he could have, but that's one of the things that we can only imagine. Meanwhile, his dad was back in Chicagna. And something that we had learned, this is what I started saying previously, is one of the documents I had found in the parish archive in Chicagna was something that mentioned Giuseppe Medica, Giovanni Battista's father, but it said as his place of origin, it didn't say Chicagna, it said Montoggio. And at the time, I didn't realize what this was. I was like, well, whatever, like everyone is from this mountain village. But no, Montoggio is a different mountain village that is a bit north. And that is why in the parish records, it was only Bacigalupi and there was almost no Medici. So Elena, the researcher, she took this information and she went to Montoggio and she looked at the Montoggio parish records. And so there she found all of the Medicas. All of the Medicas were in these records. And she even found this record from, I want to say, 1706. It's called Stati delle Anime. It's like a census that's done by the priest. So it's called the State of Souls, Stati delle Anime. And it's basically a census. Like the priest is going around to each little house and writing down the names of the people who are in each little house. And it turned out that the Medicas in question were actually not from Montoggio, which is a mountain town. They were from two different very tiny mountain hamlets, really up in the mountains, called Campo Veneroso and Salice, which are now abandoned. And you can still find on YouTube some videos of hikers hiking up to Campo Veneroso because it became kind of well known in World War II as a place where the partigiani would like hole up or whatever. And so it became kind of a venerated little hamlet, but now it's all fallen apart. It's all completely in ruins. And Salice even more. Salice is like basically has been reclaimed by nature. Really impassable. I mean, like only a donkey trail. And that's it. And so we learned a little bit about like, well, what was life for these people? What did they do? Apparently one of the things they would do, I think it's called carbonari, is they would make charcoal from wood or whatever. And apparently this was considered like the lowest of the low, like very, very humble origins we're talking about. But they were there for generations and they were all there in the books. And then Elena was like stumped she said she was like looking at all of these baptisms for like Medica, 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 all the way going back through time, all the way to like the 1690s or something. And then all of a sudden the name disappeared. Like the name was no longer present. So she was like, yeah, I don't know. Like maybe they all moved there from a different place. And then she realized that there was a different family whose name disappeared after that date. And that name was Mega. And that's when we realized this was the same family, and they had changed their name from Mega to Medica. And at first she was like, yeah, I can't explain it. I don't really know like why this would happen. And then we realized that these people weren't speaking Italian. They were speaking Genovese. And they were probably speaking a dialect of Genovese up in their mountain village. And the word mega in Genovese means medicinal.
Oh, wow.
So this was a translation of their name from Genovese to Italian, probably because around that time was one of the reorganizations politically of the region, and there was an effort being made to Italianize everything. So actually, the name is Mega if you go far enough back, which was very amazing, and we had no idea. Yeah, okay, cool. So the last like really cool story that I have, and then I'll let you talk.
That's okay. My wife says I talk too much, so that's
okay. Great. So as I mentioned, Giuseppe Medica, despite the fact that the Medicas and the Bacigalupi were from two different mountain villages, somehow Giuseppe met his wife, Rosa Bacigalupo, and they married and moved to the big city, right? And Giuseppe Medica was the one that was the specialist in this specialist floor technique. And they moved around, like, I want to say the early 1850s or late 1850s. Well, Elena, she found something in the archives because she was looking for something else, and she found actually a passport license document. So like the document that a passport was issued to this guy, Giuseppe Medica, in 1858 when he was 35. And she was so smart. She asked us like, yeah, so, what do you think about this? Like this guy that we thought was just in Genoa and never emigrated, never went anywhere. Actually, he had a passport, and we were like, yeah, so weird. I mean, we were sure that it was his son who's the one that emigrated. So she was like, yeah, where do you think he went? And we were like, oh, I don't know. Maybe he went to New York, or maybe blah, blah, blah. And can you guess, Bob?
What year was it? What year?
1858.
1858. For some reason, I want to say Boston, but...
Okay. Well, the intended destination, which was written on the passport application, was Livorno in Tuscany.
Yeah.
Because Genoa was in the Kingdom of Sardinia, and Livorno was in the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. So actually, if you wanted to go there, you needed a passport.
You needed a passport. Wow, that's something.
And it said in the application that it was for work. So presumably he was doing some big palazzo floor in Livorno and needed a passport, which we just thought was a riot. So
it's funny, but they were all separate places back. But that was just
until very recently.
The unification.
Yeah, and I did a whole bunch of research into like what was happening in Genoa. Was like the site of a lot of these conflicts, and Napoleon took over the city for like 6 years or something. And I was always wondering like how much these political changes were affecting these these people who lived in the mountains. Actually, they didn't live in the city. So I always wondered like how, like, did they even notice the stuff going around them? Or
it probably took a long time. Garibaldi started in the north, but I would think that some of these little places, it probably took a long time before it got there. I mean, eventually they had to just fall into step, I suppose.
Yeah, and I wonder also, like, apparently at a certain point, there was compulsory military service for the men. And this guy, Giuseppe, apparently did his military service in Sardinia. It said that on the passport application that he had completed his military service. So I guess in that sense, the young men at least were roped in to serve in some capacity. But other than
the nobility would typically the second son or the third son, typically sometimes the second son will become a priest or whatever, because they weren't going to get in, they weren't getting anything, and then the other sons would become officers in the military, because you had to be from the nobility to be an officer, no matter what your skill set was. But I have found, I was just randomly searching the internet one day and punching in my great-great-grandfather's name. And I found a book, and it was the officers in the Neapolitan army, because it was the kingdom of the two Sicilies at the time. And he showed up, and he married a woman from Switzerland. Her name was Elisa Moore. And I was like, well, yeah, I was trying to figure out why he married somebody from Switzerland, because he was from a noble family. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense to me. So I'm looking at these records, and he was a lieutenant in the Neapolitan cavalry, 1853. And then just above him, because they had them all in rank order, was Bernardo Mohr, Mohr, and it said he was a captain in the Swiss Guard. And I'm like, yeah, I thought the Swiss Guard just guarded the Pope. I didn't know. I was like, why is this guy showing up here? Anyway, I found out eventually that the Catholic cantons in Switzerland, specifically the Catholic ones, they were the mercenary army for all of Europe. So he was conscripted. He was paid, conscripted, whatever, to be in the Neapolitan army. And he was my great-grandfather's father-in-law. He wound up marrying his daughter. And it was like, it all kind of like, because I'm never going to find this woman from Switzerland. And it like all came together. Yeah. And then, a little note for people who just, I always tell people, just, start Googling stuff. Stuff shows up. So I said, I put in, ancestry records or something like that from Lucerne. And I found this thing, and they said, send us an email in Italian, English, or German. Okay. If you have ancestry questions. So I send them an email, and I say, second great grandmother was Elisa Moore. Her father was Bernardo Mohr. Anything. They sent me a link to the records of this. They didn't have nobility in Switzerland, but it was in Latin. I forget exactly what it called, but basically like connected families, mayors and things. There were like maybe 20 or 30 families that ran everything for centuries. And they sent me a link, and they had the records for her family, but then all the families that she descended from, all handwritten charts. I'm going back to the 14 and 1300s. And it kind of stopped with her generation. And they were all in Latin, because everybody did everything in Latin back then. And so it was like, that opened up this whole world of all these Swiss people, Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah, and that's why I tell people, you just got to come back in 6 months, type in the same thing you typed in 6 months before, and something shows up.
Yeah, I mean, it does make a difference, though, I have to say, if there's nobility involved. I feel like there's a lot more documentation for noble families. It was a real challenge researching these humble farmers, basically. But I really enjoy actually, like, okay, so maybe there's not so much to learn about the actual people. I mean, Elena did find a lot of interesting documents, so we know a bit more about like how the family is kind of intermarried and, but there's not a ton of documentation. I mean, we don't know much about them as people, we really just know like maybe their name and when they were born. We don't even know often their occupation. It's like very little information, but I still enjoy
the church records wouldn't have that. That's the civil and the civil records in the north didn't start until later on.
Exactly.
But that's why I said you were lucky. My mom's family, they were farmers from Puglia. And they were probably one of the early, maybe they were one of the test areas, because all the records from her town are on the Antonati. But the priest there, he won't let anybody in because I made friends, a couple of friends there, and I said, why don't you tell Don Nicola that, we'll pay. There's so many people from this town in America that, he could pay for the church with us, and he won't let anybody in.
But the records are digitized, you said.
Well, the civil records are.
Okay.
But not the church records. He won't let anybody into the church.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a bit of a crapshoot, unfortunately.
It is.
Yeah, but I still enjoy, like, basically embedding myself in the context of the situation. Like, okay, so I'm not going to learn, what this guy did for a living. He probably was a farmer. So then how did farming look like in these mountain places, Like, what does that mean? I mean, because there's no land. I mean, everything is rocky mountains. Trying to learn,
we were in a town in Calabria with friends there, and they took us up. The part of the town now is by the sea, so that's where kind of everybody is now. But people still live in the old town up on a hillside, right? And it's a trek to get up there, as you know. But they took us up there, and he said, you see that gate, like over there, that, archway and gate? And I said, yeah. He said, that's the road that the people would walk down to do the farming.
Okay, so they would come down the mountain to farm.
Yeah.
A plot of land.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
And either walk the donkey carts.
Yeah. Because because up where the hamlet was, I mean, it was really like you would have to hike quite strenuously for like 3 hours. And there was one part of the path that was impassable, like it wasn't well maintained and it was, dangerous. Stuff like that. I'm in a way much more interested in that than in, just names and dates. It's like, no, I want to know how these people lived and why they might have moved to the big city or not, or,
Well, and that was the cool thing about what Family Search found for me with this document, because it gave like a real insight into Maria Angela's family and her, her ancestry, but specifically her uncle, because there was a lot in there where, I mean, just for example, he put in the will that the church would get, so many ducati every year forever. Now, naturally, that didn't happen because, but, that was like, you got a real insight into that. And the fact that he said he would not leave anything to anybody unless they had the DeRiso last name. And didn't, so, when you're lucky enough to find something like that, then you kind of understand the people a little bit, which is really, really cool.
Yeah.
So before we go, though, I want to talk to you a little bit about the Mario film.
Yes.
Well, you could explain it better than I can, and then why,
Yeah, what and why. Yeah, so this is a film that I finished quite a while ago now, I think in 2012. And I was playing around with paint on glass animation. So I'm a filmmaker with an animation background. And I was Googling this song that I remembered singing as a kid in elementary school in Fiesole outside Florence. And it was this like hand slapping game that we as kids, and this particular year anyway, at this particular elementary school, we were obsessed with this game. Like it was like the funnest game, and we were always doing this game. And it was this song that you would sing. Tutti mi chiamano, and it had like chapters, and there was like different things you were supposed to do at different points in the song. So I was just remembering this song, and I was curious if anyone else on the internet remembered this song except for me. And I found a version of it on YouTube that is actually a slightly different version than the version I remember, like a slightly different tune, but it was clearly the same song. So I started researching the history of this song, and there's not a ton of information about it, but there is an ethnographer who went around Italy like in the 1950s and 60s and recorded people singing traditional songs. And apparently there is a recording of someone singing this song in the 90s. This recording, last time I checked, is not digitized, and it's in an archive in Rome. And I haven't been able to go. Every time I'm in Rome, it's like a holiday and the archive is not open. But at least there's a record of this recording in an archive. And people say that it's not clear whether it's from World War I or World War II, because it's a song about a soldier who's coming back from war and finds his girlfriend has left him and is angry about it and murders her. So I was kind of struck as an
interesting child song, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. And this is what I was struck by. I was like, it's so weird that we were singing this like fun, happy, domestic abuse song. And that's kind of where the fascination started. In the version that I found on the internet, there was an additional stanza at the end, which I don't remember in my version. Maybe we just like never got to the end of the song, but it's the stanza where he is apprehended and is sent to prison, and he's saying in a very like Italian way, he's apologizing to his mother about what he's done. So I was, of course, happy to discover this additional stanza because I thought it was important. And so I included it, and I made this little film and recorded some kids in Seattle, where I was living at the time, recorded some kids singing it. And made this kind of, I felt that paint on glass was appropriate because I knew there was going to be a lot of fast transitions in the film, and paint on glass has this ability to do like quick kind of shape morphing in a really nice way. And it has this kind of dreamy quality, which I wanted. And I used this metaphor of a bird through the film. So yeah, that was the first time I really did anything that was remotely personal, even though it's not really personal. I mean, it's not my story, but it's related to me. And actually, from the stories that I described to you today, I am working on a project about Rosa Bacigalupo, the woman who died in the hospital in Genoa, because I am just so interested in the fact that we never knew about her. Like, her story was not passed down. Yeah. Of course, that might have been because it was just too painful of a story for young Giovanni Battista to relay. As with all of this family, it's kind of in line with what I find in all of this family history research. That is, the women's stories are always much murkier and harder to discern. And this was just such a great example of this. Like, here is this woman who had something going on, and funnily enough, when she got clearly her illness was one of the reasons why they moved back to the village. But they moved back to her village, not his village. They moved back to Chicania, not Montoggio, presumably because, he wanted her to have her family around, to have like her mother and a support system. It didn't last because she was only there for like 9 months, and then she was sent to the hospital anyway. But so there was clearly a strong connection between the husband and the wife. I mean, this isn't like an abandonment story or anything. Right. I mean, it might be, we don't know, but it doesn't look like that. And so on the one hand, it's like good that she was in the hospital, right? Like, they got her the care she needed, supposedly, or at least they knew that it was beyond their capabilities to deal with. Or it could be a much darker story, of a woman being committed against her will, which was very common.
Which happens. Yeah.
So I'm just fascinated by this fact that we will never know.
So if you could go back and talk to one person, would she be the one?
Probably. Yeah.
I get that sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's just, it would probably be any of the women in the tree, to be honest. But I wonder what she thought of her son leaving across the ocean.
Whenever people, when it comes up to me, I said, I want to talk to my grandmother. Who else would I want to talk to,
Oh, well, for sure. It would be fun to talk to, my grandfather, Joe Medica, who I never met because he died before I was born. Mm. Or his mother, who died when she was 19 years old. That would also be very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah,
or the people who actually emigrated, Giovanni Battista or Assunta or his grandparents on the other side from the South, because they emigrated in the Genovese emigrated in the 1870s, and the Southern Italians 10, 15 years later. Mm-hmm. That's
Mhm.
still
Yeah.
quite early. I mean, it's all relative, but it feels very early. Like there's not that many people in their families who had emigrated already.
Yeah, well, you see, in my father's family, it was, my father's mother, she was the only one who came. Her and
Mm,
her aunt had come 10 years earlier. But again, she was from a noble family, so they didn't have to come. But I have no idea why.
why?
The only thing I could think of is that the war had just started.
Mm,
World War I had just started. Maybe my grandfather had to go in, or who knows. But her aunt's husband was some sort of entrepreneur in
mm.
New York. So you try to think of why, and I said the only thing I could think of is maybe he said, "Well, come to America, and I'll help you in a business," or something like that.
Yeah. Or
But
maybe they thought that the writing was on the wall, so to speak, for the nobility.
well, yeah, and it pretty much had already passed.
Mm,
Although some of her family, they were still wealthy to a certain extent at that time. Not now just everything gets watered down, gets lost, and all of that kind of stuff. But to this day, they still call them. They still use the Marquesa and stuff
hmm
like that. Like my grandmother's father, some king somewhere along the line, I forget which one, said that her last name was Piramalo, and it's only one family. They originally were from Spain, and some king somewhere said that for eternity, the people with this name can they could call themselves Marquis and Marquesa.
Aha, got it.
So even now they still refer,
Right,
even
right.
though it doesn't really mean anything,
No, no.
but in their circles it does.
Mm,
I look at some of these people; they still, they not many of them, but some of them still cut those corners. Where they're
right, right, right.
considered some sort of nobility or royalty or whatever. They're still the king, the son of the kings, whatever, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating to me because they pretty much ran everything.
Mm,
And after the unification, especially in the South, because the North confiscated everything, the whole system broke down in the South.
hmm
So the people they depended on the nobility for everything, and when that disappeared, they had no land, they couldn't farm. So many of them came over because
hmm
the structure completely disappeared. And in some sense, it's even there. I mean, we went, to your point, we went to some towns. There were still people there, but you would see, like the whole street with empty houses. And I
Yeah.
had asked, and they said, well, they're not abandoned per se. People still own them. They may be in Germany, or they may have be in France or other places, but they don't sell them.
hmm
And they still have furniture and stuff. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's
They
really
still hold
sad.
on to
And
it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's sad to see when you see that,
Mm. Yeah,
because
it's just
people
a
live
real
there, you know.
a lot of these small towns. I mean, it's just a like an economic situation, right? It's like
Mhm.
even the young people may not have emigrated like to Germany or Italy. They might have just moved to like the closest big city.
Yes, that
But like
too.
that's
Yeah,
still
yeah,
enough
that's true.
to
Yeah,
kind of diminish the life of the town.
yeah. And one town which I kind of understand, Capocota, which is in Molise. They're pretty vibrant, but there's like ski areas around.
Mm.
So
There's
in the
some
winter there's
industry of some kind.
there's
Yeah.
stuff to do, but a small little town of 1,000 people, but very, very, I mean, really in like nice shape. The church was like amazing, as most of them are, even in these little small towns. That's what blows us away. The
Yeah.
churches, no matter what, the churches still have the gold and the silver and stuff in them.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, and when we were in Genoa with Elena Gisli, the researcher, a few years ago, it was so interesting because we were looking at all the addresses where this family lived. And like I said, they were humble people, but the dad was trying to like make a go of it in this flooring industry. His son Giovanni Battista was baptized in this little church in the center of Genoa. I mean, in one of these very very crowded little neighborhoods that it looks like I think it's the Church of San Siro, and it's very nondescript from the outside. I mean, it's almost actually hard to see from the outside because you have to go down the right alley and then you see the facade. Otherwise, you wouldn't know where it was. But inside, it was like amazingly grand, and it was like, wow, Giovanni Battista was baptized here. It was like very impressive. And I think you could tell there was one of the baptisms for one of his siblings who died young. One of the baptisms, like the godfather was like someone of some importance in the city, like his boss or something. So, you could kind of sense that this was a momentous thing for this family from the mountains to kind of be making a go of it. Of course, we discovered that at some point they lived in the poorhouse also during this time. So like at some point things started to go south, and eventually they moved back to the village anyway. Who knows, it might have been related to the illness of the mother. But in any case, Giuseppe's flooring career didn't last till the end of his life. He moved back to the village where there were no palazzi to renovate.
Yeah, right. I just find all of this stuff so fascinating. Some of my family gets it, but most of them think I'm just like nuts,
Yes, I do know. It's not for everybody.
No, but I say this all the time. I think, I think we're chosen because I truly believe that there's some power that they want to be found.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to disappear, I
mean, and to be honest, I find the hunt for the information the funnest part. Like, the information itself is great when you get it, but it's actually more the hunt. I find it's like a treasure hunt,
Yeah, it is. And that's why, I said before, I tell people, don't give up. Come back. Things, something will show up someplace.
Indeed.
Well, listen, this has been a lot of fun, fascinating. I love the stories. I love that we have Elena in common. I'll have to send this to her. I'll send you the 2 interviews I did with her.
Yeah, I'm not surprised at all because she's amazing. So I can't recommend her highly enough.
Yeah. Well, we'll give her another plug for sure. And when I do the blog, I'll put her name back out there since you work with her.